We often struggle to comprehend the actions of people, their origin and their goal. Living in a community, we tend to expect others to behave and act in ways that are compassionate, selfless, for the benefit of all, but such purpose unfortunately is rather the exception and not the norm. This explains perhaps why we are surprised when witnessing gestures of sympathy, words of kindness, or acts of charity, thereby feeling the need to highlight and praise it. Yet, when it comes to our disappointment toward the insensitivity of others, could the fault be actually on our side? Rochefoucauld said in his influential Maxims that selfishness is the grand moving principle of 9/10 of our actions. Bearing that in mind, should such actions in themselves bewilder us to such a high extent? After all, isn't selfishness a natural biological response to the environment that surrounds us? Perhaps even a fundamental trait of ourselves as living beings. Indeed, all animals seem to engage in self-centered conduct for the sake of preservation or self-satisfaction, for example, and we humans are still, despite our claims of physical and intellectual superiority within the biosphere, deep down, beasts, essentially. In his renowned essays, Schopenhauer asserts that man is at bottom a dreadful wild animal. We know this wild animal only in the tamed state called civilization, and we are therefore shocked by occasional outbreaks of its true nature. Hence, there is nothing really extraordinary about acting animalistically or in one's own regard, since this attitude is found all over the animal kingdom. In The Seventh Seal, one character describes in a very simple manner this inexorable aspect of the game of life.
Vi tänker springa ner till byn och skvallra. Vi känner ingenting till. Var och en räddar sitt eget skinn. Så enkelt är det med den saken. Försök inte skrika. Det är ändå ingen som hör det. Varken Gud eller människor. Det är inte värt att förvåna sig över.
In his Confessions, Augustine carefully tackles the subject of realizing one's own perceived negative traits, in multiple occasions quite extensively and profoundly, and in one of these instances he professes that I preferred to excuse myself and blame this unknown thing which was in me but was not part of me. The truth, of course, was that it was all my own self, and my own impiety had divided me against myself. This extraneous categorization attributed by many people to their own desires and impulses would seem irresponsible and demand accountability for some. If people are naturally predisposed to be selfish, and if our attempts at walking through life with sincerity, concern for the next, and authenticity are fraught with unsurmountable obstacles and distressing emotional pitfalls, one then may ask with some legitimacy if it is mandatory or recommended that we carry ourselves in such a manner. Is the temptation to surrender to falsity and duplicity with the aim of attaining individual gratification that contemptible, and our effective enforcement of fraudulent volition that degrading and reprehensible? Regardless of being so, should we not perhaps accept our innate hypocrisy and unscrupulous nature and just ride along with it to the best of our ability, even if aware of its consequences? Perhaps in some minds, a reasonable argument could be made that would label as fruitless and foolish any attempt to alter what some consider to be unchangeable. One sees an example of such inquiry in Bergman's masterpiece Persona, which features this following part of a larger monologue.
Måste det vara så här? Är det verkligen viktigt att man inte ljuger? Att man talar sanning och att man har äkta tonfall? Kan man leva överhuvudtaget utan att prata hit och dit? Ljuga och svänga sig och komma med undanflykter? Är det inte bättre att man ger sig själv lov att vara slö och slapp, lögnaktig? Kanske till och med blir lite bättre om man låter sig själv vara som man är.
Perhaps such a contentious viewpoint carries with it a glimmer of acumen. At least for some individuals, its ethic, or lack thereof, is bound to appeal to a personality that disregards anything but its own principles, one whose concern for others is nearly absent. The point made by the monologue, however, appears to base itself on an appeal to authenticity, even if recognizing the corruptible, fallible, and imperfect nature of people. If someone has a dishonest, silly, or sloppy nature, should this person attempt to be what he is not? Does that attempt and accomplishment make him inauthentic? It is a question worth meditating, considering its seemingly paradoxical nature. However, Bergman refrains from providing a definitive answer to that. Whatever the solution, the theme of authenticity brings other interesting points to the table. In many cases, a mistaken sense of authenticity is tied to a delusion of grandeur or self-importance that affects their outlook on the world and its many subjects. Nietzsche states in his work Human, All Too Human that the value of life for ordinary everyday man is based only in his taking himself to be more important than the world. The great lack of fantasy from which he suffers keeps him from being able to empathize with other beings, and he therefore participates in their vicissitudes and suffering as little as possible. This insensitivity that stems from an overstated, incongruous assessment of individuality often transfigures into malice of all kinds and shapes whenever it's got a chance. For most, these do not go beyond words, though for some it translates into actions. Whatever the weapon of choice, such callous attitude is widespread and a symptom of a narcissistic society, present especially when conjoined with positions of power, and it's the downtrodden and subordinate individuals that suffer the most at its hands. In The Passion of Anna, the character played by Max von Sydow in A Moment of Despondency refers to this issue.
Det är ohyggligt att inte vara lyckad. När alla människor anser sig ha rätt att bestämma över en. Deras välvilliga förakt. Den där korta lusten att trampa på någonting levande.
Jag förstår, Andreas.
The judgmental tone and tendency to pry, involve and influence other people's lives according to one's own design is found in all areas of human interaction. Worse than that, the proclivity for destruction of others' welfare, goods and contentment is one of the most shameful features of the human race. Envy and selfishness unfortunately rule much of our coexistence, and the result is a bitter, crude, vengeful and brutish society, a reflection of its innermost instincts despite its comprehensive history, philosophical sophistication, cultural flourishing, technological proficiency or medical advancements. There lies an open wound at the core of humanity, whose consequences have been reproduced ad nauseum since time immemorial, the causal nexus being rooted in the backbone of our animal impulses. These outcomes are reflected both in trivial utterances and atrocious acts of barbarism alike. The essence of this ailment pertaining to society is seldom noticed or addressed, and the few that attempt to resolve it are dismissed as idealistic elements with unrealistic projects that are lacking pragmatism, or in other words, conformity and assimilation. To the remaining majority, whether conscious or unaware of the disease, their submission or reconciliation with it is made possible solely through one's own resilience. However, the problem itself will not dissipate on its own. On the classic Ibsen play The Master Builder, one of the main characters alludes to this condition. There's a troll in you too, just as in me, and it's the troll in us, you see, that calls on the powers outside. Then we have to give in, whether we like it or not. This troll, this beast, this monster that inhabits our mind and body is the sickness that prevents us from coexisting in thoroughly civilized and fair association. As long as we refrain from yoking these debasing afflictions, there will be no pacification, and we shall remain enslaved by their frighteningly ravishing power. One of Bergman's most disquieting films, Hour of the Wolf, has a scene with an apt description for this subject and the eroding effects it has on the individual.
Såren äras aldrig varet och för inte att flöda. Infektionen är konstant. Sen bär det snabbare eller långsammare mot slutet. Det är hjärtats motståndskraft som avgör.
Once again, Bergman's reading of the human condition is exposed as fatalistic and categorical, but nevertheless clear-sighted, proving his plain discernment of the essential nature of the human heartstrings beyond the deceptive appearances that rule quotidian performances and interactions in society. The addressing of such themes by itself deserves the utmost respect, as a facet that has been mostly ignored by cinema of entertainment purposes, the form which is known by most of the population. But the recognition that is implied by his profound unmasking and study therefore serves to explain his status as one of the great filmmakers of the past century. It's in this investigation of the murky depths of the human soul that lies one of Bergman's most fascinating aspects of his filmography, something which luckily was consistently accentuated by remarkable performances from his habitual cast and outstanding cinematography as well, as it played out for multiple decades. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check the previous essays on Bergman's thought and films, and there will be more following in the future. Feel free to like, comment, share or subscribe to the channel if you'd like to know more about cinema that transcends physical barriers, time constraints and emotional boundaries. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.